Last winter I spent a week alone in my childhood home. My parents had retired and moved to a warmer climate, but they hadn't sold the house yet. They asked me to stay there to watch over things and take care of some maintenance while they were away. It felt like an easy gig, plus I'd have a whole house to myself for the week. The first few days were great. I worked from home, took long showers, and lounged in my pajamas, just enjoying the quiet. But halfway through the week, things started to get unsettling. It was a Wednesday night when I first heard it. I'd just finished dinner and was rinsing off my plate when I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps in the hallway. My parents' house is old and the floorboards creak a certain way when someone walks on them. I froze, my heart pounding. I knew I was the only one there. I waited, barely breathing, listening. I heard nothing else, just the usual hum of the refrigerator and the wind outside. Trying to brush it off, I convinced myself it must have been the house settling or my mind playing tricks. I put it out of my mind and went to bed, though it took me a while to fall asleep. The next night, I was sitting on the couch scrolling through my phone when I heard it again. Soft footsteps, shuffling down the hallway. This time, they stopped right outside the living room door. My skin went cold. I waited, heart pounding, expecting something or someone to come in, but nothing happened. I stood up, moved toward the door, and took a deep breath before looking out into the hallway. Empty. I checked every room and even made sure the doors and windows were locked. I'd like to say that I was relieved, but in reality I just felt more uneasy. I double-checked every lock and went to bed, hoping it was all just my imagination. The third night was when things got really strange. I was in my room reading a book, trying to distract myself. Around midnight, I heard a faint tapping on the window. Now this window faced the backyard, and there was nothing back there. No trees, no branches that could tap against the glass. I sat up in bed, straining to hear. The tapping stopped. Then, after a few seconds, it started again, this time louder, more deliberate, like someone tapping with their fingernails. I wanted to look, but I couldn't bring myself to move. Instead, I stayed there, frozen, listening as the tapping grew softer and then stopped entirely. I barely slept that night, and when I woke up the next morning, I felt groggy and on edge. I decided to install one of those old security cameras my parents had in storage, hoping it would give me some peace of mind. That night, I set up the camera in the hallway, facing my bedroom door. I figured if there was anything or anyone coming down the hall, I'd at least be able to see it on playback. Around 2 a.m., I was startled awake by a loud bang. I shot up in bed, heart racing, as I heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate, coming down the hallway. I could feel each step reverberate through the floor. They stopped right outside my door. I was too terrified to move, to breathe, to make any noise. I just sat there, watching my bedroom door, waiting for it to open. But the footsteps stopped, and the silence that followed was so thick, it felt like the air was pressing down on me. The next morning, I checked the camera footage, feeling both curious and terrified. The first few hours showed nothing unusual. Then, around 2 a.m., I saw something that still haunts me. The video showed me asleep, just as the sound of footsteps started. You could hear them, clear and heavy, coming down the hall. And then, right outside my bedroom door, the camera caught a shadow, a tall, dark figure. It stood there, motionless, for what felt like an eternity. Then it slowly reached out, pressing a hand against the door. But here's the part that makes my skin crawl. The hand left a faint mark on the door, almost as if it was greasy or wet. I went to check that morning, and sure enough, there was a smudged print on the door, too large to be mine. I took a photo of it, and as I looked closer, I realized something even more unsettling. The smudged handprint had 6 fingers. I packed my things, locked up the house, and left without looking back. I don't know who or what was there with me those nights. I haven't been back since, and my parents decided to sell the house a few months later. They don't know about what happened, and honestly, I doubt they'd believe me if I told them. I never really minded living alone. It's one of those things that people warn you about. You'll get lonely or you'll get scared. But I loved my space. That was until one rainy night last February, when everything changed. I'd just moved into a new house. It wasn't big, but it was cozy, with a small front porch and a massive backyard that sloped down to an overgrown garden. The basement was one of those dark, unfinished ones with concrete floors, barely any lighting, and random exposed pipes. I didn't go down there much except to store boxes I hadn't unpacked yet. One night, I was up late in the living room, watching a movie on my laptop. It was stormy outside, and the rain was coming down hard. The wind rattled the windows now and then, making the whole house feel alive, creaking and sighing in the darkness. I was halfway through my movie when I heard a strange noise coming from somewhere below, a faint, dragging sound. I paused the movie and listened, trying to convince myself it was just the house settling or maybe the storm. But then, the dragging sound repeated, this time louder, as if something was moving beneath the floor. My stomach knotted. It had to be the basement. I turned on the hallway light and slowly made my way toward the basement door. As I reached for the handle, I hesitated, almost as if my body knew something I didn't want to admit. Still, I shook it off and opened the door. The basement light barely worked, flickering dimly as I flipped the switch. I could see shadows dancing across the concrete walls, making everything look distorted and wrong. I called out, "Hello?" Not really expecting an answer, but hoping to reassure myself. Silence. Then I heard it again, soft shuffling, like something being dragged across the floor. I froze, heart pounding, as I saw movement at the far corner of the basement. Something was there, crouched low to the ground. It was too dark to see clearly, but I could make out the outline of a person, their back turned to me, hunched over as if searching for something on the floor. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light, maybe shadows playing off the walls, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was truly there. I whispered, barely able to speak, "Who's there?" The figure didn't respond. It just kept moving, crawling slowly, its hands dragging along the floor as if it was feeling around for something. I felt my blood run cold. There was no way someone could have gotten into my locked basement. Right? I slowly stepped backward, careful not to make any noise. Just as I turned to run back upstairs, I heard a voice, soft and cracked, like it hadn't been used in years. "Help. Me." I froze mid-step. The voice was so faint, so desperate, and I felt a strange, almost hypnotic pull to go down and see who or what it was. But then, that logical part of my brain kicked in. I knew I had to get out of there. I sprinted upstairs, slammed the door shut and locked it. My hands were shaking so badly that I struggled to dial the police. When I finally got through, I tried to explain what I'd seen, but my story sounded ridiculous even to me. A crawling figure in my basement? They didn't sound convinced, but agreed to send someone over to check. By the time the officers arrived, the storm had slowed to a drizzle. They searched the entire basement while I stood upstairs, watching them through the doorway. After about 15 minutes, one of the officers came up to me, looking as perplexed as I felt. "There's no one down there," he said, glancing back over his shoulder. "We checked every corner, every inch. Are you sure you saw someone?" I knew what I'd seen, or thought I'd seen, but there was nothing I could say that wouldn't make me sound crazy. They told me to call again if anything else happened, and left me there, alone, feeling like I was losing my mind. That night, I slept with my bedroom door locked, every light in the house on. I thought that would be the end of it, that maybe I'd just imagined it all. But the next morning, When I went down to the basement to prove to myself it was empty, I found something that stopped me in my tracks. In the far corner, right where I'd seen the figure crouched, there were scratch marks on the floor, deep, jagged lines like fingernails scraping into the concrete, and right next to them, half buried in the dust, I found a single old key, rusted and ancient looking. I'd never seen it before, and I had no idea what it unlocked. I still don't know who or what was in my basement that night. I kept the key as a reminder, though. A reminder that sometimes what we see isn't just our imagination, and sometimes the things we can't explain are better left alone. A few months ago, I moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of town. It was an older building, the kind with thin walls and creaky floors, but the rent was low, and I didn't mind a bit of character in a place. Being alone never really bothered me. I liked the solitude, the quiet after long work days. But that changed one night in early September. I'd had a normal evening, just cooking a late dinner and watching a movie. Around midnight, I started winding down, ready to call it a night. As I was heading to bed, my phone rang. Seeing an unknown number flash across the screen, I almost ignored it but figured I'd answer in case it was something important. "Hello?" I said, expecting either a wrong number or some scam call. At first there was silence, just the faint static of a poor connection. Then, finally, a voice came through, quiet, barely more than a whisper. "Is anyone there?" I paused, feeling a chill run down my spine. It didn't sound like a prank or anything playful. The voice was flat, almost robotic, but there was something about it that felt off. I decided to hang up, chalking it up to a weird call, and went back to my routine, brushing my teeth and getting ready for bed. But the phone rang again, the same number. This time, I didn't answer, just watched as the screen lit up and the ringing filled the silence of my empty apartment. When it stopped, I exhaled, feeling a wave of relief. But then, just a few seconds later, a notification buzzed. This unknown number had left a voicemail. Curious but nervous, I opened my voicemail and pressed play. For a few seconds, there was only silence, and then I heard the voice again, a little clearer this time. "I can see you." My heart dropped, and I felt a surge of panic. The blinds were all shut, and I hadn't seen anyone suspicious outside. I tried to think logically. It had to be a prank, some random creep with too much time on their hands. Still, I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that someone was watching me. I walked around the apartment, checking the locks on every window and door, making sure everything was secure. Once I was certain I was alone and locked in, I went back to bed, trying to convince myself it was just a strange coincidence. An hour later, I was jolted awake by a loud crash from the living room. My heart raced as I lay there, frozen in bed, listening for any other noises. I couldn't shake the sense that I wasn't alone anymore. I grabbed my phone and quietly dialed 911, whispering to the operator that I thought someone might have broken in. They assured me that officers were on their way, but those minutes waiting felt like hours. As I sat there, clutching the phone, I heard footsteps, soft but deliberate, coming from the living room. It was then that I got a notification, a text message from the same unknown number that had called earlier. "Why did you call for help?" My blood turned to ice. How did they know? My hands shook as I read the message, feeling more exposed and vulnerable than ever. It was as if they were right there, watching me, waiting for my next move. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped, and I heard a faint scraping sound against my bedroom door, as if someone was dragging something sharp along the wood. Every hair on my body stood on end. I braced myself, not knowing what I'd do if the door opened. Then, the sirens. The sound of police pulling up outside shattered the silence, and within seconds the footsteps disappeared. When the officers came in, they searched the apartment thoroughly. They found no one inside, but the back door, which I knew I'd locked, was slightly ajar. The police assured me they'd check around the area and advised me to stay somewhere else for the night. I packed a bag and went to stay with a friend. The next day, I went back to the apartment, hoping to put the whole ordeal behind me. But as I walked through the front door, I saw something that made my skin crawl. There, on my living room table, was my own cell phone charger, neatly coiled with a note next to it. Written in a messy scrawl were the words, "I'll be back." I moved out of that apartment the same week. To this day, I don't know who it was, how they got in, or why they targeted me. But the memory of that night and that message still keeps me looking over my shoulder, wondering if someday they'll make good on that promise.